Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious. My son Theoic's voice crackled through the phone. It was Wednesday evening, and I was standing in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, watching the rain streak down the windows. The fluorescent light above the sink hummed its usual rhythm, but something in his tone made me turn it off. Silence felt better. His words hung there, unfinished, heavy with implication. Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong? I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. The mug was from a trip we'd taken to Seattle 5 years ago, back when things between us felt simple and uncomplicated. Back before everything started falling apart. I'd been having episodes lately, strange, terrifying episodes, where my body felt like it was on fire from the inside out, where my thoughts spiraled into places I didn't recognize as my own mind. My psychiatrist, Dr. Reyes Torres, had increased my sertraline dosage 3 times in the past 18 months. Nothing seemed to help. If anything, the episodes were getting worse. I'm at the clinic. I was picking up some samples for my pharmaceutical rotation, and I saw your prescription history. My hand froze on the counter. Theoic was in his 3rd year of pharmacy school at Oregon Health and Science University. He had access to databases that most people could only dream about, access to information about my medical history, my medications, my diagnoses. I'd always felt a strange mix of pride and unease about that. Pride, because my only son was becoming a pharmacist, following a respectable career path. Unease because he knew things about my health that I'd never told him directly. Things a mother usually keeps private. Theoic, I don't understand. Why would my prescription history... Mom, listen to me carefully. Your sertraline prescription. The dosage you've been taking. Something's not right. The rain outside intensified. I could hear it pounding against the roof now, a sound that usually calmed me but tonight felt ominous. My heart rate picked up. I pressed my free hand against my chest, feeling the rapid flutter beneath my ribs. This was one of the episodes starting. I recognized the sensation now. The beginning of that horrible burning feeling. The way my thoughts started to scatter like startled birds. What do you mean something's not right? Dr. Torres adjusted it based on my symptoms. That's the thing. I pulled your medication records from the pharmacy database. The prescription shows one thing, but the actual pills you're receiving... Mom, I need you to listen very carefully. I think someone has been tampering with your medication. The kitchen tilted. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. The granite was cold under my fingers, real and solid, in a way that nothing else felt real anymore. Tampering. The word echoed in my mind. Who would tamper with my medication? Who had access to my medicine cabinet? Who would want to poison me? That's impossible. The pharmacy is sealed. The bottles come directly from the pharmacy, yes. But before they get to you, they have to go through someone. Mom, I need you to tell me something. Who picks up your prescriptions? I opened my mouth to answer, but the words caught in my throat. Because I already knew the answer. I'd known it for months, but I hadn't let myself think about it directly. I'd pushed the thought away every time it surfaced, the way you push away thoughts that are too terrible to be true. My daughter-in-law, Vieira Hart, Theoic's wife of 4 years. She'd offered to pick up my medications about 18 months ago, right around the time my episodes had started getting worse. She said it was to help me out, to save me a trip to the pharmacy. She'd seemed so concerned, so caring. She'd brought me soup when I was having a particularly bad episode. She'd held my hand while I cried about the terrifying thoughts that wouldn't stop coming. Vieira, I whispered into the phone. The silence that followed told me Theoic had already reached the same conclusion. The rain continued its assault on the roof. Somewhere in the house, the furnace kicked on, and warm air began flowing through the vents. But I felt cold. So impossibly cold. I suspected it might be her, Theoic said quietly. But I needed to confirm before I said anything to you. I ran a chemical analysis on one of your pills, the ones you had left from last month. Mom, they're not sertraline. Well, they are, but they're not just sertraline. Someone has been crushing pharmaceutical-grade amphetamine and mixing it into your medication. The dosage is precise, professional. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The room began to spin. I pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down heavily. The chair scraped against the tile floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. My mind was racing now, but not in the scattered, uncontrollable way that had become my normal. This racing was different. This was clarity. Horrible, devastating clarity. Why would she do that? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. That's what we need to figure out. But Mom, I need you to listen to me. I need you to stop taking those pills immediately. Throw them away. Don't touch them with your bare hands. The amphetamine dosage mixed in is high enough to cause serotonin syndrome. That's what's been happening to you, isn't it? The burning sensation, the confusion, the rapid heart rate, the sweating? I nodded, forgetting for a moment that he couldn't see me through the phone. All of those symptoms, every single one, I'd been experiencing them for 18 months, thinking I was losing my mind, thinking my depression was getting worse, thinking I needed higher doses of medication to manage my own failing brain chemistry. But it hadn't been my brain chemistry at all. It had been poison. Deliberate, calculated poison administered by the woman my son had married. Yes, I said. All of it. I'm coming over. Don't take any more pills. Don't let anyone into your house. I'm calling the police, but I need to gather some evidence first. The hospital can do a blood test to confirm what's in your system. We can press charges. This is attempted murder, Mom. Do you understand that? This is attempted murder. The line went dead. Theoic had hung up. Or maybe I had. I couldn't remember. I was sitting in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, watching the rain fall outside my window, and I was trying to process the fact that my daughter-in-law had been systematically poisoning me for the past year and a half. That every episode I'd had, every terrifying moment where I thought I was losing my grip on reality, had been orchestrated, planned, executed with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I stood up from the chair and walked to the medicine cabinet in my bathroom. It was a small cabinet, white with a mirror on the front, mounted on the wall above the sink. I'd looked in this cabinet thousands of times. I'd opened it every morning and every evening to take my medication. I'd never suspected that anything was wrong. I'd never questioned what I was putting into my body. I'd trusted that the pharmacy was doing its job correctly. I'd trusted that my son's wife cared about me. The bottles of sertraline were lined up on the shelf. 4 of them. Different prescription dates, different pharmacy labels. I didn't touch them. Instead, I closed the cabinet and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked exhausted. There were dark circles under my eyes that seemed to have become permanent fixtures over the past 18 months. My hair, which I'd always kept carefully maintained, had started going gray in streaks. I looked like a woman who was falling apart. A woman whose mind was deteriorating. A woman who was becoming a burden. That's what Vieira wanted, I realized. That's what this had all been about. I sat down on the edge of my bathtub and let the full weight of the realization crush down on me. Vieira had been poisoning me deliberately. She'd been watching me suffer. She'd been comforting me while she was the one causing my suffering. And I'd never suspected a thing. I'd been so grateful for her help, so touched by her concern. I'd thought she was being a good daughter-in-law. I'd thought she cared about me. But if she was poisoning me, then she didn't care about me at all. She wanted me gone, or worse, she wanted me incapacitated. She wanted me to deteriorate mentally and physically until I was completely dependent on her and Theoic, until I was a burden so heavy that no one would question what happened to me, until I was invisible. The realization made me sick. I rushed to the toilet and vomited, my body purging itself of the poison I'd been ingesting. When I was done, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried. I cried for the 18 months I'd lost to this nightmare. I cried for the trust I'd placed in Vieira. I cried for the fear and confusion that had become my constant companions. And I cried for the terrible knowledge that my own son's wife had done this to me. The doorbell rang at 7:45 that evening. I was still in my bathroom, though I'd moved from the floor to the bathtub. I was sitting fully clothed in the empty tub, trying to calm my racing thoughts, trying to breathe through the panic that kept threatening to overwhelm me. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. I pulled myself out of the tub and made my way downstairs. Through the peephole, I could see Theoic standing on my porch. He was soaking wet, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his jacket dripping water onto my welcome mat. Behind him, I could see a police car parked at the curb, its lights off. Theoic wasn't alone. There were 2 officers standing behind him, their uniforms dark and official against the gray evening. I opened the door. "Mom," Theoic said, and I could see the anger in his eyes. It was a different kind of anger than I'd ever seen from him before. It was the anger of a son who'd discovered that his wife had been hurting his mother. It was the anger of someone whose entire world had just shifted on its axis. "These are Officers Gayoan Herrera and Casiara Ortiz. They need to talk to you about what's been happening." Officer Herrera was a tall man with kind eyes that didn't match the gravity of his expression. Officer Ortiz was a woman with sharp features and a notebook already in her hand. They both stepped into my living room, bringing the smell of rain and the outside world with them. "Ms. Barrett," Officer Herrera said, his voice steady and professional. "Your son has made a serious allegation against your daughter-in-law, Vieira Hart. He claims that she's been tampering with your medication. We'd like to ask you some questions about your health over the past 18 months. We'll also need to collect your medication bottles as evidence." I nodded numbly and led them to the bathroom. The medicine cabinet was still closed. I opened it slowly, and the officers took photographs of the bottles before carefully placing them into evidence bags. Officer Ortiz asked me about my symptoms, about when they started, about how often Vieira had picked up my prescriptions. I answered everything in a flat, emotionless voice. I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else, like I was floating above my own body, observing the scene from a distance. "We'll need you to go to the hospital for a blood test," Officer Herrera said. "We need to confirm what your son found. Once we have that confirmation, we can move forward with charges." Theoic drove me to Legacy Good Samaritan Medical Center in Northwest Portland. The hospital was a massive complex of buildings, all glass and steel and modern architecture. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh and bright. A nurse drew my blood in a small room that smelled like antiseptic and fear. She was gentle about it, but I barely felt the needle. I was numb. Completely numb. The blood test came back positive for amphetamine. High levels. The kind of levels that would definitely cause serotonin syndrome. The kind of levels that would cause exactly the symptoms I'd been experiencing. The doctor who reviewed the results with me was a woman named Amina Wells. She had kind eyes and a gentle manner, but I could see the shock in her expression when she told me what they'd found. The levels in your system are consistent with someone deliberately adding amphetamine to your medication, Dr. Wells said carefully. This is a serious matter. I'm documenting everything for the police investigation. You're going to need to follow up with your psychiatrist about your actual medication needs. What you've been taking isn't your real medication. Your actual sertraline levels are probably much lower than they should be, which might explain some of your symptoms. I nodded. I understood what she was saying. Vieira hadn't just been poisoning me with amphetamine. She'd also been reducing my actual antidepressant medication. She'd been creating a perfect storm of chemical chaos in my body. She'd been systematically destroying my mental and physical health with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. When can I talk to my psychiatrist? I asked. We can set up an appointment for tomorrow morning, Dr. Wells said. In the meantime, I want to make sure you're safe. Is there someone who can stay with you tonight? Someone you trust? I looked at Theoic, who was standing in the corner of the examination room, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. He nodded immediately. I'm staying with you, he said. I'm not leaving you alone. We left the hospital at 10 o'clock that night. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet and glistening under the streetlights. Theoic drove me back to my house and followed me inside. He made sure every door was locked and every window was secure. Then he sat down on my couch and didn't move. I can't believe she did this, he said quietly. I can't believe I married someone who would do this. I sat down next to him. My son, my only child. He looked broken. He looked like his entire world had collapsed, and I realized that in a way, it had. He'd married Vieira thinking she was a good person. He'd trusted her. He'd brought her into his life and into our family. And she'd used that trust as a weapon. Why do you think she did it? I asked. Theoic was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I think she wanted to make you seem unstable. I think she wanted to make you seem like you were losing your mind. And I think she wanted to do it slowly enough that no one would suspect foul play. I think she wanted to eventually get you into a care facility. I think she wanted to get control of your finances. My house, my savings, my retirement accounts, everything I'd worked for my entire life. Vieira wanted it all, and she'd been willing to poison me to get it. The next morning, I called my psychiatrist's office and managed to get an emergency appointment. Dr. Reyes Torres was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She'd been my psychiatrist for 5 years. She'd been helping me manage my depression and anxiety. And she'd been prescribing me medication that Vieira had been tampering with. When I told her what had happened, I watched her face go through a series of emotions. Shock, anger, guilt, concern. I should have caught this, Dr. Torres said, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. When your symptoms weren't improving with increased dosages, I should have questioned it more carefully. I should have asked more questions about your medication compliance and whether you were actually taking what I prescribed. You couldn't have known? I said. Vieira was very careful. She made it seem like everything was normal. Still, this is a failure on my part, Dr. Torres said. But what we need to focus on now is getting you on the correct medication and helping your body recover from what's been done to it. The amphetamine in your system needs to be processed out. The real sertraline levels need to be restored. This is going to take time, and it's going to be uncomfortable. But you're going to get better. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that I could recover from this. But I also knew that some things, once broken, could never be fully repaired. My trust in Vieira was gone. My sense of safety in my own home was shattered. My belief that the people I loved would never hurt me had been destroyed. Over the next week, the police investigation moved forward. Theoic provided them with the chemical analysis he'd done. The hospital provided them with my blood test results. The pharmacy provided them with records of when Vieira had picked up my prescriptions. All of it painted a clear picture of deliberate, premeditated poisoning. On the 8th day after Theoic's phone call, the police arrested Vieira Hart at her workplace. She was a pharmaceutical sales representative for a major drug company. She had access to medications and the knowledge to tamper with them. She had motive. She had opportunity. She had everything needed to commit the crime. I wasn't there when they arrested her. I was at home, sitting on my couch, trying to process the fact that my daughter-in-law was now facing criminal charges, attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, poisoning. The charges kept growing as the investigation revealed the full scope of what she'd done. Theoic came to my house after the arrest. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. His eyes were hollow. His shoulders were hunched. He sat down next to me on the couch and didn't say anything for a long time. "She confessed," he finally said. "She told the police everything. She said she did it because she wanted to get you into a care facility so she could have access to your money. She said she was tired of struggling financially. She said you were always complaining about your mental health, and she figured no one would question it if you got worse." I felt something inside me break. Not in the way it had broken before, when I was experiencing the serotonin syndrome. This was a different kind of breaking. This was the breaking of hope. The breaking of the belief that people were fundamentally good. The breaking of the assumption that family members would protect each other. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Theoic said. "I'm so sorry I married her. I'm so sorry I didn't see what she was doing." "This isn't your fault," I said. "You couldn't have known. You trusted her. That's not a crime." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Theoic should have known his wife better. He should have questioned why his mother was getting worse despite increasing medication dosages. He should have paid more attention. But I also knew that blaming him wouldn't help either of us. What we needed was to move forward. What we needed was to heal. The court case took 6 months to prepare. During that time, I started real treatment for my depression and anxiety. With the correct medication and the correct dosage, I started to feel like myself again. The burning sensation disappeared. My thoughts became clear. The constant fear and confusion faded. I started to remember what it felt like to be okay. But I also started therapy. I started working with a therapist named Alyara Taylor to process the trauma of what had happened. The betrayal, the violation, the realization that someone I'd trusted had been deliberately hurting me. Those things didn't go away just because I was on the correct medication. Those things required work. They required time. They required me to rebuild my sense of safety and trust in the world. Theoic filed for divorce from Vieira. It was a quick process, given the circumstances. The court was sympathetic to his situation. He was a victim too, in a way. He'd been married to a woman who was capable of attempted murder. He'd been deceived and manipulated. His entire sense of who his wife was had been shattered. On the day of the trial, I sat in the courtroom and watched as Vieira Hart was convicted of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and poisoning. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison. 15 years for trying to destroy my life. 15 years for the 18 months of suffering she'd deliberately inflicted on me. 15 years for the trust she'd violated. When the verdict was read, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, exactly. Relief would imply that this was over, that I could move on and forget about what had happened. But I knew that wasn't true. What I felt was more like acceptance. Acceptance that this had happened. Acceptance that I'd survived it. Acceptance that I was going to have to live with the consequences of Vieira's actions for the rest of my life. Theoic reached over and squeezed my hand. His grip was firm and solid. It grounded me in the present moment. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I had my son, that we'd both survived this nightmare. After the trial, I had to make some decisions about my life. I could have moved away. I could have tried to start over somewhere new, somewhere without the memories of what had happened. But I decided to stay in my house in Portland. I decided to stay in my community. I decided to face the fact that this had happened and that I was still here. I was still alive. I was still myself. I started volunteering at a local mental health crisis center. I wanted to help other people who were experiencing what I'd experienced. People who were confused about their symptoms. People who were questioning their own mental health. People who were being manipulated by someone they trusted. I wanted to be a voice of reason and support for them. Theoic finished his pharmacy degree. He graduated with honors and got a job at a hospital in Seattle. He called me every Sunday to check on me. He came to visit every other month. We rebuilt our relationship brick by brick, conversation by conversation. He was no longer the son who'd married a woman who tried to poison his mother. He was the son who'd saved my life by paying attention to the details. He was the son who'd had the courage to do what needed to be done, even though it meant dismantling his own marriage. A year after the trial, I was sitting in Dr. Torres's office for what would be our last regular session. I was doing well. My depression was managed with the correct medication at the correct dosage. I was sleeping better. I was eating better. I was thinking clearly. I was no longer experiencing the symptoms of serotonin syndrome. I was no longer living in fear. "I'm proud of you," Dr. Torres said. "I know this has been an incredibly difficult journey, but you've come out the other side. You've survived something that would have destroyed many people." "I couldn't have done it without your help," I said. "And without Theoic. He was the one who figured out what was happening." "Yes, but you're the one who survived it," Dr. Torres said. "You're the one who had the strength to move forward. That comes from inside you, Lena. That's your strength." I nodded. I understood what she was saying, and I knew it was true. I had survived this. I had lived through 18 months of deliberate poisoning. I had discovered that the person I'd trusted had been trying to destroy me. And I was still here. I was still myself. I was still fighting. The medication tampering had left physical scars. I had some lingering nerve damage from the serotonin syndrome. I had some sensitivity to certain medications that hadn't been there before. But those were minor things. The real scars were psychological. The real scars were the ones that made me question my ability to trust people. The real scars were the ones that made me hypervigilant about my medications and my health. But I was learning to live with those scars. I was learning that trust could be rebuilt, even after it had been shattered. I was learning that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I was learning that surviving meant more than just staying alive. It meant moving forward. It meant healing. It meant building a life that was worth living, even after someone had tried to take that life away from me. 2 years after Vieira's arrest, I received a letter from the prison where she was being held. She was writing to apologize. She was writing to say that she was sorry for what she'd done. She was writing to say that she'd been in therapy and had come to understand the severity of her actions. She was writing to ask for my forgiveness. I read the letter twice. Then I set it aside. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Vieira's apology didn't change what she'd done. It didn't undo the 18 months of suffering. It didn't restore the trust that had been broken. But it also didn't matter anymore. She was in prison. She was no longer a threat to me. She was no longer a part of my life. And that was enough. I focused on the present. I focused on my recovery. I focused on rebuilding my life in a way that felt authentic and true. I started taking yoga classes. I started gardening. I started reading books that I'd always wanted to read but never had time for. I started living a life that was mine, not a life that was defined by what had been done to me. Theoic got married again 2 years after his divorce from Vieira was finalized. His new wife's name was Nicaeta Day. She was a nurse at the hospital where Theoic worked. She was kind and thoughtful and genuinely concerned about my well-being. When I met her, I was nervous. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to trust her. I was worried that I would see Vieira in her, even though she was nothing like Vieira. But Nicaeta was patient with me. She understood that I had been hurt. She understood that trust didn't come easily to me anymore. She gave me time and space to get to know her. And slowly, over months and then years, I began to trust her. I began to see that not everyone was going to betray me. I began to see that there were good people in the world. People who cared about me. People who would never hurt me. Theoic and Nicaeta had a daughter named Lucan Moro. She was born 3 years after they got married. I became a grandmother. I held my granddaughter in my arms and looked into her eyes and saw hope. I saw the future. I saw a reason to believe that good things could still happen, even after terrible things had happened. When Lucan was 5 years old, she asked me why I was so careful about my medications. She asked me why I kept my pills in a locked box in my bedroom. She asked me why I was so particular about who could be in my kitchen when I was taking my medication. I sat down with her and tried to explain in a way that a 5-year-old could understand. I told her that sometimes people do bad things. I told her that sometimes people hurt other people. I told her that it was important to be careful and to pay attention to who you trusted. I told her that it was okay to ask questions and to speak up if something didn't feel right. "But Grandma," Lucan said, her small face serious and concerned, "why would someone want to hurt you?" "Because sometimes people are sick," I said. "Sometimes people make bad choices. Sometimes people want things that aren't theirs to have. But the important thing is that we don't let that stop us from being kind. We don't let that stop us from trusting people. We just have to be careful. We have to pay attention. We have to speak up." Lucan nodded, as if she understood. And in her own 5-year-old way, I think she did. 5 years after Vieira's conviction, I received a letter from the parole board. Vieira was eligible for parole. She'd served half of her 15-year sentence, and she'd been a model prisoner. She'd completed rehabilitation programs. She'd expressed remorse for her actions. The parole board was considering her case. I had to decide whether to write a letter to the parole board. I had to decide whether to speak at her parole hearing. I had to decide whether I wanted to see her released back into the world. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the 18 months of suffering. I thought about the trust that had been broken. I thought about the life I'd built in the aftermath of what she'd done, and I realized that whether she was in prison or out of prison didn't matter anymore. She no longer had power over me. She no longer controlled my life. She was just a woman who'd made terrible choices, and those choices had consequences. I wrote a letter to the parole board. I told them about what had happened. I told them about the suffering I'd endured. But I also told them that I believed in rehabilitation. I told them that I believed people could change. I told them that I was no longer interested in revenge. I was interested in moving forward. The parole board denied Vieira's request for parole. She would serve her full 15-year sentence. When I received the notification, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief? Yes. But also sadness. Sadness for the woman who'd made such terrible choices. Sadness for the life she'd wasted. Sadness for the fact that she would never know what it felt like to truly change and grow and become a better person. But I didn't dwell on those feelings. I had my own life to live. I had my daughter-in-law Nikaida and my granddaughter Lucan. I had my work at the Mental Health Crisis Center. I had my volunteer activities. I had my therapy sessions with Alyara Taylor. I had my medication, carefully managed and monitored. I had my life. 7 years after Vieira's arrest, I was invited to speak at a conference about medication tampering and poisoning. The conference was organized by a group of healthcare professionals who wanted to raise awareness about the dangers of prescription medication tampering. They wanted to hear my story. They wanted to understand what it was like to be poisoned by someone you trusted. I was nervous about speaking publicly about what had happened. I was nervous about reliving the trauma. But I also knew that it was important. I knew that my story could help other people. I knew that by speaking out, I could help prevent this from happening to someone else. The conference was held in a large hotel in Portland. There were hundreds of healthcare professionals in attendance. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, psychiatrists, therapists. All of them there to learn about medication tampering and how to prevent it. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. I took a deep breath, and I began to tell my story. I told them about the 18 months of suffering. I told them about the confusion and the fear. I told them about the burning sensation that had felt like my body was on fire. I told them about the terrifying thoughts that had invaded my mind. I told them about the moment when Theoic had called and told me the truth. I told them about the investigation and the trial and the conviction. But I also told them about the recovery. I told them about how important it was to listen to patients when they said something wasn't right. I told them about how important it was to question the standard narrative when symptoms weren't improving as expected. I told them about how important it was to consider the possibility that medication tampering could be occurring. When a patient comes to you and says their medication isn't working, I said, don't just increase the dosage. Don't just assume that their mental health is deteriorating. Consider the possibility that something else is happening. Consider the possibility that someone is tampering with their medication. Ask questions. Do your job. Pay attention. Because your patient's life might depend on it. The applause was thunderous. People stood up from their seats. They came up to me after my speech and thanked me for sharing my story. They told me that my words had changed the way they would approach patient care in the future. They told me that my story had made them more aware of the dangers of medication tampering. And I realized that something good had come from the terrible thing that had happened to me. By surviving, by speaking out, by sharing my story, I had helped other people. I had made a difference. That night, I called Theoic and told him about the conference. I told him about the standing ovation. I told him about the people who'd thanked me for my courage in speaking out. And I heard the pride in his voice when he said, "I'm so proud of you, Mom. You've turned something terrible into something meaningful." "We both did," I said. You saved my life by paying attention. You saved my life by having the courage to do what needed to be done. We saved each other, Theoic said. That's what family does. We save each other. 10 years after Vieira's arrest, I received another letter. This one was from a woman named Harlowena White. She was writing to tell me that she was a victim of medication tampering. She was writing to tell me that reading about my case had helped her understand what was happening to her. She was writing to tell me that she was grateful for my willingness to speak out. I wrote back to Harlowena. I told her that I was sorry for what she'd experienced. I told her that she would get through this. I told her that she would survive. I told her that the most important thing was to speak up and to get help. Over the next few months, Harlowena and I corresponded regularly. I became a mentor to her. I helped her navigate the investigation. I helped her prepare for the trial. I helped her understand that what had happened wasn't her fault. I helped her believe that she would recover. And she did recover. Her case went to trial. Her perpetrator was convicted. She was awarded restitution. She started therapy. She started taking the correct medication. She started building a new life for herself. When Harlowena sent me a photo of herself a year after the conviction, I barely recognized her. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She looked like someone who'd been given her life back. And I realized that by sharing my story, by speaking out, by being willing to help others who'd experienced similar trauma, I had found a new purpose. I had found a way to transform my suffering into something meaningful. Theoic and Nikayeta had another child, a son named Olion Montgomery. He was born when Lucan was 6 years old. I was a grandmother to 2 children now. I was building a new life. I was healing. I was moving forward. But I never forgot what had happened. I never forgot the 18 months of suffering. I never forgot the feeling of not knowing who to trust. I never forgot the moment when Theoic called and told me the truth. I never forgot any of it, because that's what surviving means. It means remembering what happened. It means acknowledging the pain. It means moving forward while still honoring what you've been through. It means using your experience to help others. It means building a life that's worth living, even after someone tried to take that life away from you. The medication that Vieira had tampered with had contained amphetamine mixed with my sertraline. The combination had caused serotonin syndrome, which had manifested as the burning sensation, the confusion, the rapid heart rate, the terrifying thoughts. But it had also done something else. It had forced me to pay attention. It had forced me to question what was happening to me. It had forced me to speak up and to seek help. And in doing those things, I had saved my own life. I had survived. I had thrived. I had become someone who could help others. I had become someone who could speak truth to power. I had become someone who could transform suffering into purpose. This is my story. This is the story of how my own son's wife tried to poison me. This is the story of how I survived. This is the story of how I healed. This is the story of how I found meaning in the aftermath of betrayal, and I'm telling it because I want others to know that if you're experiencing symptoms that don't make sense, if you're questioning your own mental health, if you're wondering whether something isn't right with your medication, you should speak up. You should ask questions. You should trust your instincts. Because your life might depend on it. If you or someone you know has experienced medication tampering or poisoning, please reach out to your local poison control center or law enforcement. Please seek help. Please know that you're not alone. And please know that recovery is possible.